Why? Why can't I own a Canadian? What would happen? What would happen if I hired two private investigators and made them follow each other? Why is Nicolas Cage on the cover of a Serbian biology textbook? And finally, what is a boyfriend? And where can I download one? That's the top one for some reason. I love Google, but sometimes these questions are a little bit unnecessary. I have another question though, and it's a serious question, and so I think it's a more important question. My question is, if all this Christian stuff that we talk about is true, how would we know? In other words, if there's a God who loves us and forgives us and wants us to be with him forever, how would we know? This is an important question, perhaps actually the most important question in the world. Now, obviously, this question is on the forefront of certain people's minds. Certain people are on the fringes of faith, and they're exploring different philosophies and different religions, and you're trying to compare different things. And so this kind of question is right in your wheelhouse. This is the kind of thing that you're thinking about nowadays. And so I think this sermon will be particularly relevant for you. But a lot of us here have been Christians already for a long time. And it's easy for us to come to this question and say, well, I know this Christian stuff is true. I've kind of tackled that hurdle already, and we're good. Except we're not quite good, because actually every Christian is still partially atheist. And I say this because of what Paul writes in Romans chapter 7, where he talks about the struggle that's within himself, and he talks about this part of himself that refuses to acknowledge God. So even for the Apostle Paul, perhaps the greatest Christian of all time, there's this part of him that's basically an atheist. And if that's the case with Apostle Paul, that is also the case for every one of us Christians here. And we also need to be converted still and experience the grace of God and come alive in new ways. And so, if you're a Christian, I want you to listen to this sermon actually like an atheist, because we are partially atheists. But my question once again is, if all this Christian stuff is true, how would we know? And here's my answer. We know the truth with resolve, reason, and relationships. Resolve meaning effort and determination. Reason meaning logic and intellectual integrity. And relationships meaning we pursue the truth with other people, and we don't just try to do it by ourselves. And that's my answer to one of the most important questions in all the world. And I just want to spend the rest of my time up here explaining this answer and showing you how I got this answer from the Bible. So, the first way to find the truth is with resolve. That's what we find in our Bible story. A story takes place in a graveyard. And it's in a graveyard because 2 days back, Jesus had been killed. So his followers had watched Jesus being basically tortured to death on a cross, and they'd watched helplessly, and as he died, their dreams and their hopes died with him. And after Jesus was dead, some people put his body in a tomb in a graveyard. And so for the past couple of days now, the disciples have been hiding away in a house, grieving, and also hiding from the same people that killed Jesus, because they figured if they wanted to kill Jesus, the disciples would be next. So these disciples are just hiding, and they're just lost in life, just completely confused, because they never expected that this kind of thing would happen. But there were some women who were not afraid to step outside that safe house. And they were not afraid to be known as people who loved Jesus. And these women were determined to give Jesus a proper funeral. And so they went to the graveyard with a resolve in their heart to honor Jesus. And that's the background behind our main passage today. I'll read to you the main part of the first part of our Bible passage now, from Luke chapter 24, starting at verse 1. was read to us earlier, but it's good to refresh our minds. It reads like this. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleam like lightning stood beside them. So 2 men appeared as if out of nowhere. And these didn't look like ordinary men because they had clothes that gleam like lightning. These were not ordinary men. And very quickly, these women realized that these are angels. And these angels had news that Jesus had risen from the dead. He's not dead, he's risen. And these women would be the first ones to find out. Now here's a question. Why did the angels appear to these women of all people? These women were not VIPs in that culture. In fact, back in that culture, women were so lowly regarded that if a woman saw something, like some crime or some crazy thing, they wouldn't be allowed to testify in court because they weren't, women as a rule were not considered reliable witnesses. So why didn't the angels appear to somebody else? Maybe somebody else more strategic. Maybe to Peter, the leader of the disciples. Maybe to John, Jesus' best friend. Maybe, I don't know, Jesus' enemies to rub it in their face. Maybe the emperor to show him his boss. Why not even to random people on the street? Why these women? Why were these women the first to find out? Actually, it's very fitting that these women were the first to find out because there's actually a very long pattern in the Bible that the truth is for those who try. The truth is for those who try to do the will of God. John 7:17, Jesus said, anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. Meaning, if you step into the will of God, you will find the truth if you try. And the truth is also for those who try to understand. Proverbs 2 tells us, indeed, if you call out for insight and you cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you'll understand the fear of the Lord, meaning all this Christian stuff, this Bible stuff, and find the knowledge of God. In other words, if you have effort, determination, and resolve, you can expect to find the truth. But what if you're busy? What if you have exams? What if you have kids? What if you have jobs, like 2 jobs some of you have? Like, how do you find the energy and the time to pursue the truth? Well, I'm reminded of a story from our modern times. Years ago, some runners got together, and they were together to run an ultra marathon. You might heard of, well, you guys must have heard of marathons before. A marathon is kind of like the gold standard of endurance racing. Marathon is 26 miles long. Now, this is an ultra marathon that these guys were on. This was a 100-mile race, so it's almost 4 marathons back to back. And these guys are pretty crazy. It's one serious race. One of the racers was a guy named David. David was a soldier. And he wasn't just any soldier, but he was a Navy SEAL, so one of the elite. And David started running, and he ran for hours. And halfway through the race, he broke one of the little bones in his foot. And it hurt, but that didn't stop him because he was a soldier, so he kept on going. But probably it affected the way he ran because he broke another another bone in his foot. And then he broke another bone in his foot. And by mile 7, he had broken every small bone in both of his feet. Cringy, eh? And he still had another 30 miles to go, which is like more than a full marathon left to go. But David just kept on going. And he went, and he finished this marathon, this ultra marathon. And one of his fellow racers was a businessman, and this fellow racer was so impressed by David's resolve that he asked David to come live with him and teach him some mental toughness. So David agreed. And David moved in with a businessman. And one day, David and the businessman were together in the house, and David noticed that the guy had a chin-up bar. And David said, I want to see how many chin-ups you can do. And so the guy went to the chin-up bar, and he did 8 chin-ups. And David said, all right, take 30 seconds, try again. So the guy went back to the bar, did 6 chin-ups the second time. It was just struggling. And David said, all right, take 30 seconds, try again. So the guy tried again. He did like 3, and then he was completely done. Like he couldn't move his arms, kind of done. Leave it to a Navy SEAL to make people do that, right? And then the Navy SEAL said, we're not leaving this room until you do 100 more. And the guy kind of just stopped and he thought to himself, this is not possible. But, you know, if there's a 260-pound Navy SEAL telling you what to do, you don't really argue with him. So the guy, especially his arms are tired already, right? So like he just went back to the chin-up bar and he did 1 more, took a break. He did another one, 1 more, took a break, 1 more. And by the end of that day, he had finished 100 more pull-ups in that sitting. And David explained to that guy something called the 40% rule, which is what the Navy SEALs use. They say that when your mind tells you that you're done, you're actually only 40% done. You still have a lot left in the tank. And I think we can actually take this kind of mentality into our pursuit of the truth. There's actually more in the tank if you're busy. So this is what I want you to do. When you're too busy to pursue what might be the most important question in the world, when you're busy, get out your calendar and write something in it. Write out that you will go to church and you will experience Christianity. Or you will go and have coffee with a friend and you will have a serious, deep conversation where you guys will support each other and seek after the truth together. Or you will spend half an hour reading a book and you will get 3 points out of this to think about for the rest of the week. You can actually do that. That's something that I do in other ways. And every time that I do that, every time I just write it in my calendar, the time just appears. Because our time can actually stretch to accommodate important things like this. So it takes resolve, and it's not comfortable for us to do this, but I want to encourage you, try this. Write it in your calendar, because this is the kind of determination and resolve we need if we're going to find the truth. It's going to set us free and bring us to life. So the first key to find the truth is resolve. The second way to find the truth is reason. Let's go back to our Bible story, back to verse 4. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, he's risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. And the angels were saying, ladies, think about where you are. Does it make sense what you're doing? You know Jesus. And later on in the chapter, we know their names. And these are people who had actually followed Jesus around for some time. You know Jesus. You've seen him do amazing things. You've seen him multiply the loaves of bread to feed 5,000 people. You've seen him heal the sick. You've seen him raise people from the dead. You've seen that God is with them. And you've seen that everything that he says comes true. And you've heard him say that he would go to Jerusalem and he would be handed over to the chief priests and he would be killed, and on the 3rd day he would be raised again. So why are you here? Why do you look for the living among the dead? Is what the angel said. It was a request for intellectual integrity, to use logic, to use reason. And that's all that they needed, to know that Jesus had risen from the dead. They didn't need to actually go to the graveyard. They could have known already. And so it is with us. Reason alone will lead you to the truth about Jesus. All you need is a commitment to the truth. Jesus said in John 18:38, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What an incredible claim that he makes. Sounds almost extremely arrogant. But he said that because he's given us enough evidence that if we only seek the truth, we will find evidence. And we can come to the truth. In recent times, in our modern day, one legal expert, he's actually looked into the evidence he was a skeptic and he looked into the evidence and all this evidence piling up. He's a legal expert. He's used to seeing cases in court. And he said he's seen people carted off to death row on less evidence than what we have as Christians for the resurrection of Jesus. So our problem is not a lack of evidence. Our problem is actually a lack of willingness to reason. Because actually, it's human nature to avoid the truth when it's not convenient for us. My father-in-law told me a story about a time when he was younger. His name is Kelvin. And back in the 1980s, he was in Hong Kong. He was working as a policeman, and he was employed with the Marine Division, so he was kind of like the Coast Guard over there. And he spent his days patrolling the water with the other police crew in a big ship. And it was an exciting time to be part of that Coast Guard because the Vietnam War was happening back then, and every once in a while a boat full of Vietnamese refugees would come, and these people would be really at the end of the rope because to get from Vietnam to Hong Kong, these people would have to go past parts of China, and China would be rejecting these boat people, but Hong Kong being a separate country at that time, they would be taking in these refugees. And so the police would meet these refugees in the water, and the police would give them food and drink and get them off their boats, and the refugees would always be so happy to get off their boat because they knew that they were starting a new life. But not everyone was eager to get off the boat because he didn't only deal with refugees. There's one time it was typhoon season, so it was a big tropical storm. It was whipping up the waves. And the waves were as tall as 2-story buildings. And even this big police ship was in danger. And so the police started shutting down their operations, and they were heading towards a typhoon shelter where things would be safer. And suddenly around midnight, they got a distress call. It was a distress call from a little ship. It was a pleasure craft. It was a rich man's little boat. And the owner called the police, and he said his engine was dead and his anchor wasn't working because the conditions were so rough in the water. And so the head officer decided, okay, we have to save this guy. So they stopped the ship, but they couldn't get the ship closer to that little pleasure craft because the chance of collision in the water would be way too high, and that would be a disaster. And so this big police ship, they had these little inflatable motorized rafts. And so they lowered down Kelvin and another police officer into this motorized raft, and off they went into the sea, into the darkness, and the wind and the rain and the waves. It was really dangerous what they were going through, but they eventually made it all the way to that pleasure craft. And then as the two little vessels got close to each other, Kelvin managed to jump over to the other side at great risk to his own life. And he went inside that pleasure craft, and he found that owner and said, "I've come to save you. Let's go." And the owner said, "My engine's dead. Can you help me to fix my engine? I think if we work together, we can save my boat." And Kelvin said, "I can't save your boat. I can only save you." And the owner said, please, I need you to save my boat. And Calvin said, I can't. This boat is drifting closer and closer to the shore where the rocks are really dangerous. We don't have much time. We have to go. And they went back and forth for about 10 minutes, and it became really clear that this guy was not leaving his boat. And so Calvin had to leave him behind. He jumped back on his inflatable raft, and he and the other officer sped back to safety. And Calvin never found out what happened to that pleasure craft. He actually deliberately avoided the news after that because it's just so disappointing, because he was saying to me afterwards, like, how could a guy be so stupid? Like, he had a chance to save his life. I was risking my life for him, and all I could think about was his boat. I don't think that owner lacked intelligence. I think the problem was that the truth was inconvenient, that in order to be saved, he'd have to lose something that he really loved. And that's human nature. It's hard to think straight when we have something to lose. It's hard to imagine or desire the things of God when it means giving up something that's really dear to you. And so we have to find a way to keep our heads straight. Just want to round off this point with a couple of the suggestions. If you're not a Christian, one of the ways you can keep your head straight is to be disciplined with the way you deal with philosophies. To say that every philosophy gets the same treatment, the same level of skepticism, the same level of research, the same kind of exploration, so that you can actually see which side has the best case. I want to encourage you, if you're not a Christian, to be as fair as you possibly can with your mental resources. That's one way to maintain clarity with your mind. And if you're a Christian, I want to encourage you, feed your mind with the stuff of eternity. Keep looking for fresh ideas, fresh angles. Maybe you'll get ideas from songs or sermons, or maybe from Bible studies, maybe from mentoring or service. But you need to think about the stuff of eternity in order to reason more clearly. And that wraps up my second point, which is that the second way to find the truth is reason. You can find God if you just reason well. The third way to find the truth is relationships. Let's go back to verse 9. It's just a short verse for a short point. It says, when they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and all the others. So in other words, these women, they came away from the tomb and they shared what they had experienced. It wasn't just about them and their own private encounter with God. No, they were sharing with other people that they knew, other people who were trying to find the truth. And other people, as we read on in the chapter, other people would have other experiences, and they would together pool their experiences together, and they would together find the truth. They'd all get it together. And that's how Christianity is supposed to work. We can't do it alone. We need community and relationships, and we're supposed to connect deeply with other Christians so we can find the truth together. And so the discipline for us is to seek out those conversations. Pray for deep friendships. Work towards those things. Don't lose your friends for dumb reasons, because those relationships will lead you into truth and into life. You can find God through relationships. I'll conclude by summarizing everything I've said, and then I'll pray for us. So in summary, our Bible story was written so that we would make the same discovery as these women were. The Bible story teaches us 3 ways to find the truth. We find it with resolve and reason and relationships. Resolve meaning determination and effort. Reason meaning logic and intellectual integrity. And relationships meaning we don't do this on our own. So let's seek out those conversations. Let's seek the truth together. Because if we can find the knowledge of God, it'll be the greatest discovery of our life. I'll pray to close. God, as usual, your word is difficult, but it's good for us. So take our small offerings of willingness and faith and curiosity even, multiply them 100 times over. Lead us into life, for that is your will, for your glory and for our joy. Amen.